Welcome, Bob. This is 24th in New Delhi, 23rd in the United States night, and the meetings for the Prime Minister started with Harris and Morrison. It says, meeting Modi is a coming-of-age moment for Harris. It says, US President Harris meeting Indian Prime Minister Modi in the White House on Thursday afternoon is a coming-of-age moment for the Indian diaspora. A prominent US newspaper in her home state has said on the eve of the historic meeting between the two leaders. So I'm reading this out because this is what's being said in the US newspapers, right? Kamala PM talk up Indo-US ties as first in-person meeting. Apparently the personal chemistry may not have been that good, but that's because of India's past and its problem with what we are doing at home. But more importantly, you got to remember our DNA of North Indian males, right? North Indian basically. 2-3 strikes against Kamala Harris. One, she's a woman, that's one. Though we try and pretend otherwise. Second, she is South Indian. And third, more importantly, she's black, right? So that gives a difficult kind of recipe for our Prime Minister and all his secretaries, who are all Indians, males, chauvinistic males, to try and deal with, right? Then you have Modi, Morrison discuss Quad strategic alliance, big tech, okay. Then you had this very important takeaway. Modi shoots for Predator drones, critical tech in talks with US CEOs. But what is important to note here is what I want to read out. Is Vivek Lal, CEO of General Atomics, makers of the dreaded unmanned aircraft whose storied career includes stints with armaments companies such as Boeing, Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. General Atomics is already working with both governments in an effort to provide India with latest systems and technologies supporting national defense, and it has also partnered with Indian companies to develop solutions for Indian defense as well as capacity building. This is the important part, capacity building, which neither Rafael does nor the Russians do. Then you have this, no plan to include India and Japan in AUKUS security alliances yet, says US. And bulk of the reason has to do with India itself. Well, I'll read it out to you, right? Fuming France cancels meet with OZ and India. While they've made up with the United States, sent their what's his name, their ambassador back, but they're trying to play mind games with Australia. But does Australia care? No. But you got to read this. This is really fascinating by Mac Fisher. France, which is striving for global power, is still struggling to get it. And what France is struggling to get, India is struggling to get to, right? It's just identical. Reconciling the dilemma between independence and reliance has animated and bedeviled French strategy ever since World War II, left most of Europe subjugated to foreign superpower. Same thing, it's got the same issue with India. The planned submarine sale follows a long line of moves calibrated to project French power, maintaining the country's ability to steer its own fate, while aligning with the allies whose help Paris knows it needs, paradoxically, to stand on its own. That's the funny part. But losing the contract highlighted the difficulty of achieving both. Same thing with India, right? For the French, independence has always meant autonomy, said Bruno Terratis. But that has never been 100%, and it has never been 100% independent. And India has never even been 99. Charles de Gaulle, president from 59 to 69, sought Washington's help in unifying Western Europe against the Soviets. But he also undermined US influence at every turn, the better to assert French leadership instead. He oversaw France's emergence as a nuclear power, ejected US troops from France, withdrew from NATO, and tried to persuade West Germany to loosen its ties to the same alliance. Now that's reality of France, right? He oversaw France's emergence as a nuclear power. That's what I said. The fact that he did this while expecting continued protection of the NATO alliance only added to the Americans' exasperation. Now that's exactly what's happening, folks. And this could be written about India too. Cheers. Later. On the build-up to this meeting, which is in-person Quad meet in US on September 24th, that's tomorrow PM to attend. There's been a lot of action, 2-on-2 with the United States, a very consequential visit by Blinken to India, a very consequential visit by Jaishankar to the United States, the 2+2 with Australia, and a lot of stuff has happened. Like infra and maritime security top agenda at virtual Quad meet. This is what had happened in March. This showed, by holding this meeting, Biden showed that Quad was at top of the agenda. Malabar drill in August to send out Quad message to China. So while there is military action in the Quad, but not openly coming out, is actually holding us back. Quad navies to kick off Malabar exercise from today. That's the same exercise we are talking about, right? But this is where we kind of Xerox copy France and our dilemma, and hence we fall through the cracks. The Wages of Dithering, written by Raja Menon. The announcement from Washington that US, UK, Australia are to form an alliance against China comes as a resounding slap to the Indian foreign policy establishment trying to ride two horses simultaneously. The information that Australia is to be provided nuclear submarine technology further humiliated the External Affairs Ministry and rubbed salt in the wounds of the Indian Navy. The finest in the world, we all know that, will only be made available to Australia. Canberra has reaped the rewards of steadfast friendship with the US and accepting the punishing tariffs imposed by Beijing on Australian agriculture export to China. These tariffs were imposed by a vengeful Xi Jinping for Australia's refusal to abandon its American ally. And it's all about this, folks. Trust. How can America trust us when we come into bum chum with people like bulls or bears like Sergei Lavrov, right, who keep messing up our foreign policy? The Navy remains the only service capable of any punitive action against China. You've got to remember that. With nuclear submarine technology, Australia has now been catapulted into a frontline state against Chinese aggression, something the India with a population of 1.3 billion and a GDP approaching 5 trillion can only dream of. Despite a lack of support from the PMO and MEA, many naval veterans have, on their visits to Washington, approached key figures in the US establishment about nuclear submarine technology for the Indian Navy. The answer has always been the same. The US Navy is against transferring the technology to a non-aligned state. India's efforts have been crippled by a lack of funding and the inability to access highly enriched uranium cores for the propulsion reactor. With the introduction of the Quad, we had an opportunity to operationalize the coalition and set up the Quad Secretariat in India. Suggestions and pleading with the MEA and PMO have all fallen on deaf ears. It was exactly my point, folks. Beijing has armed the Pakistan Navy, Air Force to the teeth, has bases in Gwadar and Djibouti, supports the Taliban in Afghanistan, is a strategic ally of the Myanmar Junta, yet we are reluctant to take the Quad beyond a diplomatic talk shop. Does the dithering come from timidity or a misplaced sense of Chanakyan cunning to successfully befriend the US without antagonizing China? It is time that Delhi realized that regional power will not come from stringing 1 million men across the Himalayas, but from a navy supreme in the Indian Ocean and commanding the access choke points to international trade. At the least, an operationalized Quad would have given us info dominance over critical areas if the Navy's anxieties are addressed. But by using the Quad for diplomatic and political grandstanding without naval representation, we have lost the little leverage that we could have had, folks. We have time to build that up. We got to get off our fence and decide on our national interest, folks. Cheers. So welcome, folks. What's the foreign policy press saying in the United States? Situation report: Quad converges on Washington. For the first time, the leaders of the 4 members of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue are set to converge on the White House on Friday. Publicly, the Biden administration insists that the meeting isn't about the elephant in the room, that's China. But China has continued to toughen its military posture in the region since the chaotic US withdrawal from Afghanistan. In particular, the Taiwan problem is becoming more urgent. Is this a military thing now? Even after tangling with Chinese troops in a deadly clash on the border last year, India has still been reluctantly tiptoeing towards a more forward military stance in the region. The White House is coming into the summit with some diplomatic wind in its sail after inking a deal with the United Kingdom and Australia to provide Canberra with nuclear-powered submarines over the next 18 months. It's a hugely important messaging to China and their allies in the South China Sea, the ex-old American allies. India and Japan won't be involved in the so-called AUKUS partnership, according to the US administration, but look for the Biden team to begin to inch India closer to wider military cooperation with Japan and Australia. Look, folks, look. Readout of Biden's call with French President Emmanuel Macron on Wednesday, the US President reaffirmed the strategic importance of French and European engagement in the Indo-Pacific region. Look for the Quad leaders to try to find ways to get European Union and NATO countries, which have already been conducting freedom of navigation operations in the region, more involved in Asia. Look, folks. This is all you're going to get is from the foreign policy press of the United States. Our analysts are not going to read this out to you. Cheers. And this is what Michael Kugelman on 23rd September writes in the Foreign Policy, how the Quad surged back from irrelevance. Important, right? The group has seen significant momentum in the last year. The Quad navies held a military exercise in the Indian Ocean last November. The AUKUS partnership between Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States should give the Quad an additional boost. Okay, that the Quad is now flying high is a dramatic turnaround for an entity that spent nearly 2 decades in irrelevance. There's something you have to remember. There is little reason to believe that AUKUS, which entails Britain and the United States helping Australia develop nuclear-powered submarines, will undermine the Quad. AUKUS is a security pact for the three close allies. By contrast, the Quad has become a non-security grouping. Aside from joint military exercises, there is no formal security dimensions to the group, and there lies the problem. The fact that the Quad has evolved away from the security is an advantage for India, which eschews security alliances and seeks to focus its foreign policy around efforts to tackle shared global threats, especially those that impact the developing world. India will enter the Quad summit from a position of confidence, given that it has turned the corner on a terrible pandemic surge and showing signs of economic recovery and of increased production in the vaccines. Ultimately, AUKUS benefits Indians' interests. Two separate groups of powerful players will now seek to counterbalance Chinese power, one with military strategies and the other with non-security tools, including a vaccine production plan that pushes back against Beijing's own vaccine diplomacy. Disconnect between Washington and New Delhi, the partnership will further entrench US interests in East Asia, where the United States worries about Chinese provocation and their impacts on US treaty allies. India views the Indian Ocean region as its main strategic concern. This is one of the big disconnects, right? But we got to take on that load on our shoulders. The Quad itself reflects the disconnect as well, given that its members, barring India, are Pacific powers. It will fall to Modi during his bilateral meeting with Biden to emphasize the urgency of according more strategic centrality to areas closer to India's neighborhood. Here, Britain and France can play a larger role, I think. For the talk of growing non-security cooperation with the Quad, for the threat posed by China continues to be the core driver of US-India partnership, and it will figure prominently in Modi's meetings while he's in the United, folks. And what are they following? India to resume vaccine exports, Afghan girls out of school, terror threats scuttle cricket matches in Pakistan, folks. Cheers. More later. Let's see how far the Quad's come, as C. Raja Mohan writes in the Indian Express on October 13, 2020. Quad and the global churn. Engaging Quad partners on reforming China-centered economic globalization is a rare opportunity for India, but it also involves engineering internal change. The Quad, or the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue between India, US, Japan and Australia, is now emblematic of the geopolitical churn in the Eastern Hemisphere. Less noted but equally significant is this geo-economic agenda that has drawn South Korea, Vietnam and New Zealand into the post-pandemic consultation, that the so-called Quad Plus format. India finds itself as the front line on both, confronting an expansive Chinese aggression on its frontiers and Beijing's growing strategic influence in the subcontinent and the Indian Ocean. Okay, engaging the Quad partners on reforming the China-centered economic globalization of the last 3 decades is a rare geo-economic opportunity for India, but it also is a big challenge. Okay, so while this is happening, what have we been doing? We've really been pump priming with Australia. Australia to upgrade 4 defense bases to boost Indo-Pacific engagement. They're the frontline guys, just like India, right? India, Australia to hold 2+2 talks at the earliest. Defense Minister speaks to boost strategic ties. AUKUS won't impact Quad. India ties, says US. Studying pact, Rajnath tells US counterpart, but India is not going to cry over wolf unnecessarily. India and Australia 2+2 talks likely next month, and happened. Australia unveils COVID support package for India, suspends. This is what happened. India and Australia to boost ties in first week. 2+2 ministerial talks this week. Australian Defence Minister visiting India. Galwan took India-China ties to different directions. Ahead of 2+2 talks in Delhi, Australia slams Taliban government on our side. After US and Russia, now Australia. Afghanistan is dominating India's diplomacy. India-Australia talk Afghan crisis, implications terrorism. India seeks Australia's support to enforce UNSC resolution on terror heavens, and they got a good hearing, right? Quad looks into future, says India and Australia rebuff China. World must unite in its approach on Afghanistan, says Jaishankar after 2+2 talks. Very, very successful talks. Quad eyes synergies to beat influence of Chinese goods. Modi to have bilateral with all netas. So this is turning out to be really good. But India really needs to jump off the fence at some point in time, folks, to really be able to fructify the opportunities available in various sectors, including defense, folks. And one of those things is, as what I've also been saying, and what Chief Menon has also said, is that we really need to set up, in my opinion, the Quad headquarters in the Andaman and Sea Nicobar Island. And Navy still continues to have an edge over the Chinese PLAN, and we need to invest in it to ensure that it stays that way. Cheers and Jai Hind.